Good morning to all the viewers. This is Kavita Patel from Srimati Sadguna Siyusha Arts College for Girls before you to discuss Anita Desai's novel Cry the Peacock. Once again a very warm welcome, and let's begin today's interactive session discussing one of the most prominent Indian English novelist, Anita Desai. Let's begin with Anita Desai. Anita Desai is not a new name. Anita Desai's works mark a new and mature phase in Indian English fiction. If we are going to discuss a women novelist in the history of Indian writing in English, we need to go back to some important names to be discussed before we talk anything about Anita Desai. We just quickly talk about the Indian scenario of fiction writers. I would like to begin my talk by introducing the trio, that is Mulk Raj Anand, Raja Rao, R.K. Narayan, who had a unique place in Indian English fiction. These writers occupied, or rather had a dominant place in the history of Indian writing in English, that is especially fiction, in the 1950s. And the writer today we are going to talk about, Anita Desai, started her career in 1960s. Before Anita Desai, there were few very important women writers like Kamla Markandeya, Nayanthara Sehgal, and many more, who discussed the questions, or rather the female psyche, in their own way. But when we talk about Anita Desai, she has a very special and a very new and mature state of her being, because she introduced for the first time the trend of psychological novel in the Indian English fiction. So now let's begin with Anita Desai. Today I am going to discuss about Anita Desai, a general estimate of a novelist. Then we are going to talk about her debut novel, Cry the Peacock, and concentrate mostly on the main protagonist of the novel, Maya. So now I would like you to see on your screens, Anita Desai says, "My novels are no reflection of Indian society, politics or character. They are part of my private effort to seize upon the raw material of life, its shapelessness, its meaninglessness." Now here, I just want you to understand these words very minutely, because every writer is influenced by the particular period in which the writer exists. For example, if we just compare the first lot, for example Nayanthara Sehgal's novels, what sensibilities she discussed had a different setup, had a different background. But when we talk about Anita Desai, her focus is on the life, that is the intricacies of life, as she said, the shapelessness and the meaninglessness. And more she's talking about the private effort, about her own. That is the most important thing about Anita Desai. Now let's go to the second slide, and here we begin with the introduction of Anita Desai. With more than 10 novels and 2 short story collections to her credit, Anita Desai is today the most well-known among Indian women novelists in English. You can just count on the tip of your fingers the other novels she has written. We are not going to discuss all of them here. We have today we are going to concentrate on one specific novel, that is Cry the Peacock, but the other novels she has written are Voices in the City, In Custody, Fire on the Mountain, Fasting, Feasting, and many others. Let's go to the next slide. Twice she was shortlisted for the prestigious Booker Prize. The range and sweep of her fictional work is remarkable. Now here, I would just wait for a minute for you to introspect, or rather analyze, a writer who is an artist at the same time, a keen observer. In one of her interviews, she was asked a question that why your characters are different or are more specifically psychologically drawn. Why you enter into the psyche of the characters, or rather why your novels are psychological novels. Then, as an observer, this is what we can come to an analysis, that her parentage, her bringing, and experience has given her a cosmopolitan outlook and a sympathetic understanding of the painful aspects of the human predicament. What are these human predicament? Loneliness, rootlessness, and alienation of the sensitive and the tender-hearted. Now, this is what we are going to discuss in this novel, Cry the Peacock. She is going to talk about how a very normal person is drawn towards alienation. How once a person is not heard, or once when you don't give an ear, or if you don't understand the sensibilities of a person, to what extent it drags to. And here I would like to admit that Anita Desai is a keen observer, in the sense she has developed the sensibilities, the sensitivity in her to that extent that she could understand if somebody is in a problem. She herself has said that she is always a listener to those who need to come out of some problems. Now let's move on to the next one. As I said, endowed with remarkable sensitivity, she can apprehend the emotional problems of her fellow beings. Here, I would like to wait for a minute and just brief you that when we talk about life, when we talk about reality, when we talk about bringing the facts in creative writing, it is often said that that writer is labeled as a social realist. But I would like to correct here that Anita Desai is not a social realist. She is more or less involved in the individual. That is, she is concerned with the individual. I quote individual, and that is what she is capable of doing, and that is what is before us. Now let's move on to the next slide. Anita Desai's purpose in writing is to discover for herself and then aesthetically convey the truth, which for her is synonymous with art. Therefore, her endeavor is to discover the significance of reality by plunging below the surface and plumbing the depths, then illuminating those depths till they become a more lucid, brilliant, and explicable reflection of the visible world. Now here I want you to read this slide once again, because this is what the process of a creative artist makes her involve and then come out with a unique work. She says that she is involved, or the process of her creative writing involves her, where she plunges below the surface and plumbing the depths in, then illuminating those depths till they become a more lucid, brilliant and explicable reflection of the visible world. And here we are clear that she is involved in the psychological process, the psyche of the individual. At the outset, I just want to make it very clear with the students who are reading Anita Desai that when you are reading Anita Desai, you need to make up your mind or be ready with certain terms, or rather a deep understanding of certain terms like psychology, psyche, psychoanalysis, alienation, isolation, so many such words. They might sound very different than what you have been reading in your study, that is literature, but when we are reading Anita Desai, we need a special inclination towards, and these are the things which might bring you near to her works. Now let's move on further. Now when we talk about the sensitivity of the creator of the work, that is Anita Desai herself, she has made a confession once. I quote, "I confess I am afraid of speaking out about the art of writing, the mechanics of my craft. I have an intuitive and deep fear that by speaking of something subterranean and subconscious, I will destroy it. It is something very frail." Now this confession comes from the creator, that is Anita Desai herself, when asked that what type of writing, what kind of novel, what kind of psychological novel you bring out, and then she says it is a process very difficult to be framed in words, and if rather she gets into that, she might spoil or she might destroy the delicate intricacies, the process, the flow of the emotions or the tanglings which she's trying to portray through various characters in her novels. Now let's move on further. That was Anita Desai as a person, as an individual, as a writer, as a creator. And now let's move on to her novels. As a novelist, her novels span an extensive range of issues. And here we are just going to count what are the various themes which are prominent in her novels. What are the themes or the issues she takes up, like female psyche, the experiences of immigrants, that is diasporic to some extent, aloneness of the human being, that is alienation, isolation, cutting off ourselves from the society, people, then the burden of existence, then more serious is neurosis, or death is the way out. And this is what we are going to focus on further when we talk about Maya, the protagonist of the novel Cry the Peacock. In her later novels, we come across some positive approach towards life. It's not that she's not in line, she's very much in line, but as she progresses, as she writes so many novels, in the later part of her novels, we find that positive approach towards life is a very significant theme. And then she also talks about deeper spiritual urges that transcend national and religious barriers. These are, in a concise way, I have presented the various themes which we come across her novels. Now let's talk about her characters. Anita Desai's characters are intense, self-absorbed, possessed by a conscience that never allows them peace of mind, constantly analyzing, probing and questioning, merciless in its passion for introspection, mental and spiritual conflicts of the individual conscience, striving to come to terms with itself. I would like to go back to the slide again. They are in bullets, but these are the most important aspects to be kept in mind when we talk about Maya, the main character of the novel, Cry the Peacock, that her characters portrayed are intense, self-absorbed, possessed by a conscience that never allows them peace of mind, constantly analyzing, probing and questioning, merciless in its passion for introspection, mental and spiritual conflicts of the individual conscience, striving to come to terms with itself. This is, in short, the analysis of all her characters, very much common. If we just compare the two novels who brought a revolution in the history of Indian writings in English by women, that is Cry the Peacock followed by Voices in the City, we see both the protagonist, Maya and Monisha, have all the traits very much in them as they are listed here. They are a mixture, or rather there is a blend of so many things in one composite self. Now let's go further. If we just talk about, in general, about her protagonist, what they comprise of. Her protagonist, the sensitive individual, whether it is male or female. I would here just for a minute would like to interrupt and say that Anita Desai's novels prominently talk about women characters as their protagonist, but she is not in line with any of the feministic sort of a viewpoint. She is not talking about women's liberation or the discriminations in that feminist way of it. So when we talk about her protagonist, we are going to keep in mind both male and female. I read, the sensitive individual, male or female, is poised against hostile or indifferent forces of the family or the society, leading to suffering and utter loneliness. And here comes the theme of loneliness again, where both male and female protagonists come down to their doom, or rather to their merciless end, because they are left in the midst of hostile people around them, or rather hostile circumstances. Here I quote Arya Ghosh, who says, her characters are torn. I quote, they are torn. Her novels chart a peculiar path of circularity where texts only begin and re-begin and end by coming back to the point of beginning once more. And that is what is often reported, or rather remarked, by students of literature when they read so many varied, they come across so many varied text writers, that when they have a psychological novel before them, they are rather confused, or rather they find it rather, I don't say absurd, but definitely they are not able to understand in one reading. Let's proceed further. Now, from here, I would like to discuss the technique she has adopted in her novels, and not completely a stream of consciousness technique, but to some extent she is the first Indian English fiction writer who has endeavored to bring the stream of consciousness mechanism technique in her writing. I quote, "As it has been refined since the 1920s, stream of consciousness is the name applied specifically to a mode of narration that undertakes to reproduce, without a narrator's intervention, the full spectrum and continuous flow of characters' mental process, in which sense perceptions mingle with conscious and half-conscious thoughts, memories, expectations, feelings, and random association." This is Abraham's definition, where we are given a brief idea of what the stream of consciousness technique means, and what, as a student of literature, and especially as a student who has to analyze a psychological novel, has to keep in mind that whenever we are reading a psychological novel, we are more into the understanding of the mental process in the whole, we are rather with the mental process of the character. We are very much with the conscious, subconscious, half-conscious state of the character whom we are reading, and that is the definition of stream of consciousness. But when we apply this to the novels of Anita Desai, again we come across that definitely in her novels we find the probing into mental processes. Her novels depicts the flux of emotions and sensations passing through the consciousness of a character. It is concerned with the pre-speech level of thoughts and emotion. Again, when we read a psychological novel, the first thing after reading is a feel of confusion. You are left in a state of chaos. You can read on the screen, the novelist places us within the mind of characters and shows what is happening in his soul at the subconscious or even the unconscious level. And now this is what we call the psyche. The psychology, psyche, these are the terms which are very much in line when we talk about any stream of consciousness, and that is what it means. It depicts the chaos and incoherence, the welter of sensations and emotions that constitute the human consciousness. What is welter? Welter is the confusion, that is incapability to handle, or rather left in a state of despair, of sensations, emotions that constitute human consciousness. Now let's talk about when a creative writer involves in a process to depict the mental process of a character, right? To what extent that quest is a success, or to what extent the dilemma of the characters or the enigma of whoever, the male or the female protagonist, comes to a sort of a solution. Is there a possible solution, or it is left in despair? Now, when we talk about Anita Desai, her canvas is the mindscape of her characters, and it is the inner reality she explores. The conflict between self and society, or forces beyond the self, and the search for solutions or answers on the part of the self assumes the pattern of a quest within the framework of the narrative. But when we read the novel, when we analyze the novel, finally we come to a conclusion that the quest seldom leads to a success. Now here the inner reality is to be kept in our mind. Here just I want you to be more conscious regarding what we are dealing with. When we talk about a female writer in general, when we take up a book, we definitely see who the writer is. I'm just giving you an example to make you understand the real core or the right way of analyzing a text, especially written by a female. Now, to an uncritical eye, reading a novel is like, in short, for a layman, novel is the world of words. It is rather crafted, it is rather constructed, and it is brought. But in Anita Desai's works, we see that there is no such construction, no such possible way of constructing. Things come in a flow, things come in a very chaotic fashion because she is trying to explore the unexplorable, and that is the inner reality of the self. Now, this inner reality of the self, in quotes, is to be kept in very much in the center, because when we discuss further the main protagonist Maya, we are not talking about the superficial character Maya, that how she looks, how she behaves, what she is, but we are more into the process of her inner reality, of her instincts, of her carvings, what she wants, what she desires, what are her expectations from others. And these are the questions which are to be answered if we read a character sketch in a psychological novel. Let's proceed further. Now, talk about the mode of writing. We talked about the technique, that is stream of consciousness technique she has adopted, not in its maximum, but to some extent her novel she writes in that stream of consciousness. Now, when we talk about the mode of writing, a succession of images that externalize the internal conflict is the mode adopted in her novels. That is, the images, the symbols she uses is to externalize the internal conflict. Then she gets into manipulation of time is another characteristic feature that is very important, and the most prominent one is time constantly shifts between past and present and is always subject to the inevitable influence of the past. That is, shifting from present to past and past to present is one of the prominent trait of any psychological novel, which is very much found here too. Let's focus on the particular text today we are going to discuss, and that is her debut novel, Cry the Peacock, written in 1963. And the theme, or rather it is focused, who is focused? It's purely a woman-centered narrative in the first person. It gives voice to the fears, anxieties and sorrows of a hypersensitive woman, Maya, verging on neurosis. Now, I'll read this once again because this is the protagonist we are going to talk about. She is a hypersensitive woman. Maya is a hypersensitive woman verging on neurosis. And now here again we enter into the world of psychology, where we are going to again ponder on certain terms like neurosis, psychosis, and many other terms related to psychology, that is split personality, dual personality, and so on. Now let's move on to the next. Now from here we begin the character sketch of Maya. Maya is neurotic, sensitive and imaginative. And this is what makes her character very complex, that she is neurotic, at the same time very sensitive and again imaginative. Maya is full of life and wants to enjoy life to the utmost. She is interested in all the good things of life, in the life of birds, animals, in poetry and in dance. Now this is the feminine side of a character, Maya, that is, she is a pure feminine character who is interested in all the things, that is, to enjoy everything in her life, and that is what we are given a picture when we see this character further. She loves herself in enjoying beautiful sights and sounds. She is an Epicurean to the core. But in contrast, she is married to Gautam, a friend of her father, very senior to her age, and a prosperous middle-aged lawyer. He is a kindly, cultured, rational and practical, too much engrossed in his own affairs and of prosaic personality. Now here I would interrupt again to just brief you with the main characters in the novel. As I said, Maya is the protagonist. Then we have Gautam, Maya's husband. Then we have her father, Rai Sahib, and her brother. These are the major four characters we would come across when we talk about Maya and her and being influenced by others who are the people who affect her life. And for the first and the foremost is her husband Gautam, a friend of her father, very senior to her age, and a prosperous middle-aged lawyer. And from here we begin the journey of Maya. And at the outset, it's very much important, it's very much essential to keep it in mind that Maya is married to a person of her father's age, very much elder to her age. And this is what, in a way, brings a crux in her life. If we are just having a one-side view that a girl, a very tender, enthusiastic girl, is married to a person of a very opposite sort of a polarity. Now let's move on further, that when we talk about opposite, when we talk about a different setup of Maya, that is getting into a different setup, what characteristics of Gautam, that is, she minds. It's very difficult to bring the whole novel over here, but I have taken a few things. He looks upon her love for good things as nothing more than sentimentalism, and once makes a disparaging remark about her that she has the mind of third-rate poetess. Now this is what the character of Gautam is to be seen. To his remark, Maya is touched to the quick and responds, because, I quote, because when you are away from me, I want you. Because I insist on being with you and being allowed to touch you and know you, you can't bear it. Can you? No. You are afraid you might perish. Now this is the relationship we are going to talk about. That is the relationship of a husband and a wife, where the wife, Maya, is of a very tender age and she is married to Gautam, who is a total opposite of what she desired. Now let's move on further, where the definition of neurosis is very much needed to understand the behavioral pattern of Maya as the novel unfolds. What is neurosis? Neurosis reminds us of the fact that there is a seamy side to our civilization. Society compels every individual to repress instinctual urges and the desire for the free exercise of will, and forego the chances of deriving pleasure in the act of living. I'll read this definition once again because we are going to discuss Maya as a neurotic, suffering from neurosis. Now, when we say this, we need to understand the definition of neurosis to the fullest. What is neurosis? Neurosis reminds us of the fact that there is a seamy side. Now, when we say the seamy side is the dull side of our civilization. Society compels every individual to repress instinctual urges and the desires for the free exercise of will and forego the chances of deriving pleasure in the act of living. Now, this is a human predicament where society compels each and every individual to repress. Now, when we talk about repression, suppression, we have to keep this point very much in the mind that we are talking about a female, Maya. And here again, the patriarchal setup has a very important role to play. He compels every individual to repress. Now here, in Maya's world, the society is her father, her husband, and her brother. That is, they are the components who compel her to suppress her feelings, and then unconsciously she is what? That we see her at the end. Let's move on to the next. That if the individual happens to be too weak and sensitive to openly defy such oppression, finds an alternative in neurosis, which is a form of both suffering and protest. Now, this is to be kept in mind that it's not that everyone who is not given the opportunity to enjoy or to live the life in the fullest does not get down into neurosis. We are talking about the most sensitive, that is, weak and sensitive type of people who defy such oppressions, who are not able to resist. Here I am talking about resistance. That is, too weak and sensitive people who are not able to resist the odd or the hostile circumstances or the people in their life. They succumb to neurosis. And for them, this dilemma, this problem is itself a solution. As I said, that it is more or less both suffering and protest. It is the dilemma, the enigma which they come across. Let's move on to the next one. The opening of the novel. The novel opens with the death of Maya's pet dog, Toto. In her state of agony and depression, she is reminded of the astrologer's prediction that in the 4th year of her marriage, there will be a death, either hers or her husband's. Now, from here begins the journey of the character Maya, that she starts relating the death of her pet dog with the forthcoming things in her life. That is, when she was told in her childhood that her horoscope, when it was seen by an astrologer, said that in the 4th year of her marriage, a death will take place. It will be either Maya's or her husband's. And here enters superstition, and rather we can say that superstition and psyche. Maya gets so much involved, one-to-one every day. She is getting into this prophecy that one day she is going to die, otherwise Gautama is going to die. And that is what the novels begin with. To make herself free from the burden. What is this burden? Burden of the prophecy, that is the death. Maya recites to her past and fantasizes her childhood days. And here we are going back to the past, from present to the past, and she fantasizes. Fantasy becomes a part of total structure of the novel, and it is constantly projected along with and in contrast to the world of reality. And this is what we will see, that when she is fantasizing, when she is talking about her childhood, her past, she is disconnected from the world of reality. Maya always clings to fantasy as she is unable to relate herself to reality. Her relationship to reality passes through 3 different stages: her childhood, marital life, and the final stage when she totally surrenders herself to the world of insanity. When we talk about Maya, we are more into the female psyche. What is female psyche? Psyche means the functioning of the brain, the functioning of the mind. Now what Maya connects, that is how Maya connects the events in her life, brings her to a particular stage as Maya exaggerated reactions. Maya's exaggerated reactions make her high-strung. When she's exaggerated, she becomes more nervous. She creates her own island of loneliness and grieves of Gautam's inability to fulfill her expectations. She is not outletting. She is more or less introvert into, and then she expects, and at the same time her emotions come down to a low esteem. Who is Maya? Basically a pampered and motherless childhood. She is a pampered and motherless child. Her childhood spent in the care of her wealthy father, Raisab, has left her unfit to surmount the tensions and anxieties of normal existence. Why this point is to be kept in mind? Because to some extent, when we talk about a character, when we talk about a particular type of a character, we need to look into the history or the family history, and in Maya's case we come across her father Rai Sahib. Again, he has a very crucial part to play in building the psyche, Maya's psyche. We can say rather that he plays a very crucial role, but of what sort? Is he responsible for ruining Maya's psyche? Now that question is very important to understand Maya. We can go further that the father in Maya's unconscious. From the psychoanalytic standpoint, a question arises when we read the novel that does Maya's father, Raisab, unconsciously contribute to the ruining of her psyche? Yes, definitely he plays a very important role. To what extent is to be explored. Who is Raisab as a person? Raisab is a man groomed in Victorian lifestyle and progressively disposed in many respects. But at the back of his mind is a thorough Brahmin with an unshakable belief in fatalism, which gives the resignation to his size and gentleness of his voice. Now here the most important term to be kept in mind is fatalism, and that is what he preached Maya to. Let's see what sort of fatalism or what type of influence Maya had. He would exhort Maya to accept the bitter facts of life. I quote, he says, "If one cannot do nothing about them, why not accept?" And this is what he preached to Maya, that when you are not able to change, why not accept? And this somehow subconsciously entered in Maya's personality, and that is what the reason that she resists, or rather she camouflages her real self, or rather evading the real self, and there are dozens of reasons why she does this. We expect Maya to be a good wife, good daughter, good sister, right? Then she portrays or projects herself like that. but somewhere in the subconscious she is repressing her real feelings, and that is how that her personality gets into a sort of a split later on. Let's now go further. As I said, fatalism, this trait is found in Rai Sahab because there are, I think we are in scarce of time. If not, I would quote from the text where he says the prophecies by the astrologer, that is the astrologer's prophecies, are nonsense. He says that there is nothing stuff in it, and then he explains his exaggerated reaction to the prophecy, which predicted that in the 4th year of her marriage either Maya or her husband would die. Now what Rai Sahab actually wants Maya to be is, as I quote here, daddy's girl. Maya is all submissiveness, and so he rejoices in her, saying that in a daughter he has a treasure. He would like her to be a daddy's girl, in quotes, daddy's girl, evoking his feelings of protection rather than showing any signs of maturity and independence. And this is what to an extent ruins her life, that Rai Sahab from the very beginning never wanted Maya to grow on her own, or rather mature in the real sense of the term. He always wanted her to be dependent. He always wanted her to be submissive. He always wanted her to have all those feminine qualities which are most welcome in that patriarchal setup. And then Maya shapes according to what a daddy's girl should be. Now let's go on further. When he comes to know, that is, or when he realizes that Maya is attaining marriageable age, he fixes on his own without taking into considerations Maya's consent. He never involves her into it and fixes her marriage with Gautam, which was the most, according to Maya, that was the reason that her life was spoiled. Father fixation. Now why this term? Because there are many reasons why Rai Sahib got Maya married to Gautam. I quote, Maya fondly remembered her father as through her married life. He is always my gentle father for her, and she longs for him with fiercest desire. Why this remembering through her married life? Because Maya realized that Gautam is not to be replaced by her father. He is a father figure, but he is not like her father, and that is taking her into the past, where she is in a way she is believing Rai Sahib, her father, as her savior. Superficially, this is what she has been telling. But when we go further, when the novel proceeds, what is the real reality? Or rather we say the reality principle we come across, that is the ego. The ego of Maya denies and desires need not to be acceptable to the unconscious. To her unconscious mind, her father is a savior, but that is not the fact. Now here again, the traits of a neurotic person. Who is a neurotic person? What is the process, the mental state? We need to read this very carefully. Nobody can deceive the storehouse of psychic energy operating on the pleasure principle. It always aims at gratification of the instinctual urges in total disregard of objective. Now this is the pleasure principle Maya is carving for. She wants a satisfaction. Satisfaction of what? Of instinctual urges. But in reality, they are not possible. And that is flares, and that flares rather, or that brings us to the different shades of Maya. And this is what I have understood. The deception of the drama between these ill-coordinated psychic agencies in Maya is perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of the novel. Now, what is this ill-coordinated psychic agency? It is, on the face, she is praising her father, she is telling that he is a savior. There's one instance when they are in a train, and when she's come across some monkeys caged, she says that her father my father might have come. Look for him. Help me look for him. He will open the cages. So in her mind, the father figure is a savior. But again, there is a conflict. Instead of a savior, her father has actually encaged her. At the unconscious level, Maya has every reason to nurse a grouse against her father for having been instrumental in denying her choice, making and self, determination, and ultimately throwing her into the fetters of marriage with Gautam. Unconsciously, she has each and every reason to disagree with her father because he, in a way, has routined her life. But consciously, however, she not only professes love and regard for him, but looks up to him as a liberator and savior. And that is what I said is the conflict. And when we talk about the title, the peacocks. Now again, the peacocks have the symbol of the peacocks has a very important thing to do in the novel. There is an identification of Maya with the peacocks that represent for her cries of love, which simultaneously invite her death. Like her, they are the creatures of exotic wild and will not rest till they have danced to their death. Now, these peacocks symbolize the entanglement of the instincts of Maya, that is, the marital bliss, that is, she wants, she carves for, the closeness with her husband, which is denied to her in some way, gets her into a sort of alienation. Now, because we are in short of time, just quickly go through the rest of the slides. That struggle for survival, the peacocks she's talking about. Now, what is this obsessional neurosis? Maya is not a normal neurotic, but she is more or less an obsessed one because she is occupied with all the prophecies, and that is how those are the things which are leading her towards her death. Now I'll skip few more slides here. The most important thing to be kept in mind is the novel begins with the superstitious, that is the superstition and psyche. There's a blend of superstition and psyche. Why Maya behaves, or why the behavioral patterns are such, because they are triggered off by the death of her pet dog, and that is what makes her obsessed with the thought that the dog has died, and someday, next day, either she or Gautam are going to die. I think we are in short. We'll just go back to the headings of the slides. Just she is talking about the secret, that is, she is planning, or rather she is planning Gautam's death to some extent to avoid hers. Then we can find suppressed hostility, which according to Freud is the characteristics found in obsessional neurotic persons. And then step by step she gets into hostile and cruel impulses. Because of her superstition, she is to an extent where she plans for Gautam's death. According to her, death is a solution. Being a creature of instinct who wants gratification, satisfaction, and that satisfaction is gained with Gautam's death. Death as a solution because she very much believed in the prophecy. She wanted some death to take place, but she loved her life more, so she planned Gautam's death. Now, when we talk about wild satisfaction, gratification, I just want to ponder for a minute here that what all Maya does is again in a state where she is not able to distinguish between to what extent she has gone. Again, in psychological terms, it is psychosis. Once a human organism is entrusted to psychosis, nature takes its own course. In fact, in psychotics, the superego, the moral agency, becomes completely inactive. And that is what has happened in Maya's case, where, again, Maya is not able to resist herself because that is the only solution for her. And then, by the time Maya deliberately schemes the death of Gautam, her withdrawal from normalcy is complete. And we can see the peak of Maya's madness where she kills Gautam, and finally at the end the act of violence turns into her own death. And that is what we come to the end of this session. Thank you very much for cooperation. Thank you.